Good morning. This is Rotan Bainik. Those of you who don't know me, I am a pain physician with a PhD in basic science. So, in addition to my clinical obligations, I also spend some time at the basic science lab and have collaborative research work with other faculty members within the university. Today I am going to talk about one of the research projects of our lab. And before I start, please, few housekeeping thing, please log into OpenTempo to get credit for this lecture. And regarding disclosure, I would like to let you know that I do not have any conflict of interest to disclose. And please mute yourself. So if you have any questions, or please, if you don't understand anything I say, please type in the chat window, and at the end I will try to answer them. So at first we talk about translational research and challenges. So this cartoon describes the difficulties we have in the translating basic science finding to the clinical practice. So at first, see that basic scientists like myself or Dr. Laura Stone, we brainstorm a lot of ideas in the basic science lab using rats, mice, and different state-of-the-art techniques like RNA-seq and histochemistry. When we apply this hypothesis on the clinical science, it doesn't fit very well, and a lot of ideas die here. And because we human species are very complex, and when some of the ideas survive this first valley of death and they go for clinical trial, and a lot of these ideas die in the second valley of death because of the toxicities of the compound, or effect doesn't seem to be as robust as the basic science research. So these are the fundamental complexities we have in translating basic science finding into the clinical practice. And if you look at the pain practice, it is not difficult to understand a problem we face in the translational research, because you know that we have very few drugs to choose in our in pain medicine. We are still using opioids, which have been discovered at least 5,000 years ago in Abyssinia and currently Arabian Peninsula. We also use aniseed, which was found by the Greek philosopher in the eucalyptus leaf extract. Only drug I can think of developed from pure bends to the bedside approach is ziconotide. A lot of you probably never heard the name of this drug. It is available only for intrathecal drug delivery. So this doesn't mean that basic scientists are not working hard and yes, now not trying for development of the new medications. It's just difficulties to translate all the hypotheses or compound to the clinical practice. So here comes the reverse translation process. Here we take the drug that is already approved in the clinical practice to the research lab for additional indications or disease. And one good example of the reverse translation is gabapentin. The drug originally discovered for seizure, and then it turned out that terrible seizure medicine. Then Pfizer took this drug back to the research lab, and they found that it is good for neuropathic pain. Currently, it is FDA approved for many pain conditions, and it is most commonly used drug in the world. Today, I am going to talk about story of another reverse translation work in our lab. And my story started at MD Anderson Cancer Center. As you know, this is the world's largest cancer center. They have a lot of tall buildings, and these buildings, some of the buildings have the hospitals, faculty center, research lab, and this long skyway connect these buildings. This skyway is pretty long, almost like 2 miles. And visitors, patient, and staff use the shuttle service to go from one building to other using this skyway. I just would like to show you, I thought it is cool. So MD Anderson treats mostly cancer patients. It is devoted to the patient care, cancer patient care. 95% of the patient treated at MD Anderson have cancer. So for trainees, a lot of opportunity to see cancer-related complications. And since I did my pain fellowship at MD Anderson, I saw many variety of cancer-related pain. One of them is oral mucositis. Basically, what happened here after radiation therapy or chemotherapy, the patient developed ulceration in the oral mucosa. They also develop ulceration in the stomach and GI tract. And I can tell you this is horrible, horrible disease. It is during the time they develop this mucositis, they cannot talk, they cannot drink anything, you can eat, and they must admit it in the hospital and get a very high dose of IV opioids. Fortunately, if you stop the offending drug, it goes away within few weeks. But during this time, the patient suffer a lot from the mucositis. And let me tell you, introduce you my little friend, Carlos Roldan. He was my classmate at MD Anderson. He has an unusual research, his unusual career. He was a ear doc and for almost 10 years and promoted to the associate professor in the UT Health System. Then he decided to do pain fellowship. It's kind of unusual to have a ear doc in the pain fellowship because you know that for subspecialties that can apply for the pain, ear is not one of them. Carlos was well known for his out-of-the-box ideas about pain management. So one day he saw a patient with severe oral mucositis, and after seeing the patient, he was telling us that I'm going to give this patient Methylene Blue oral rinse. And everyone, like attending, fellows, nurse, looking at him and, what did you give? And because they know that what Methylene Blue is just we never heard that it can be used as an analgesic. So he was asked to give a presentation about Methylene Blue. So before Carlos' presentation, I only know a few indications of the Methylene Blue. I know that it is used for methemoglobinemia, although I never used by myself, but it is high yield for anesthesia in training exam and also board exam. They ask the questions like the patient went to Rocky Mountain or Grand Canyon and they drank water in the spring and they suddenly turned to blue and saturation like 85%. When I see the 85%, I know the answer. But it took me a while to understand why Rocky Mountain, why Grand Canyon. And apparently the spring in this mountain spring has high nitrite, which convert hemoglobin to methemoglobin. I also saw use of Methylene Blue in cardiac for refractory vasoplasia and as a last resort. And sometimes urologists or GYN cases, they ask us to push Methylene Blue to identify structure and ureteral injury. Carlos presented a very different use of the methylene blue. Most of the studies he presented is either case report or case series, except one, I think one is a randomized control trial.
To force an app to close, double-click the home button. Then
presented the papers that used intradiscal injection of methylene blue for discogenic pain and sacroiliac joint pain, and they infiltrated with methylene blue, and cutaneous infiltration of the methylene blue have been used for anorectal pain, and methylene blue oral rinse used for oral lichen planus. And some enthusiastic of the regional anesthesia also used methylene blue in the paravertebral nerve block. And I don't know why methylene blue need to be used, but this is the case report says. And it was also a topical application used for vulvovaginitis and candidiasis. So he made a very strong case to use the methylene blue oral rinse for oral mucositis. And ideally, you must get IRB approval, but MD Anderson, to give off-label use in 5 patients, you do not need to go through IRB. So he gave this oral rinse to the 5 patients, and he published this data in the pain practice. And as you see this table, all these patients did extremely well. Their pain score decreased significantly, and as you see here, pain score decreased significantly, and also their morphine equivalent dose also decreased after the methylene blue oral rinse. So after this publication, he became famous. He got offer for a visiting professorship, and pharmaceutical company was asking him for patent applications. Overall, very happy story for his out-of-the-box ideas. But as a basic scientist, I was struggling to understand how methylene blue causes analgesia. And all these studies Carlos reviewed and presented to us, none of them showed any mechanism. It's almost like methylene blue attaches to the receptor, then something happens, and you got great, tremendous effect, strong analgesia. Some studies commented that it might be weak neurolytic, but they did not present any evidence. So here comes the reverse translation. When we don't understand the mechanism of a drug that is already approved, and for a particular disease, we can take this drug back to the research lab for further research. And I was interested to learn if the methylene blue can cause an analgesia and whether it has a neurolytic effect. Before I jumped to the ship, I studied methylene blue, how methylene blue works. And in my study, I found that it is a fascinating drug. It is highly soluble in water, and it has aromatic structure, as you see here, and which made it lipophilic, which means it can penetrate the cell membrane very easily, and at the cellular level, it accumulates in the mitochondria. In the mitochondria, you see all this great receptor complex, which shuttle the electron from complex 1 to complex 3, complex 4, and then which forms the ADP to ATP. Methylene blue actually enhances this electron transport by it forms the leukomethylene blue, and it kind of bypasses the transport and make the transport efficient. So which means methylene blue means more ATP, which is good, and that's why it is used in several cytotoxic condition. And some people in the internet is suggesting to drink methylene blue every day so you can get more ATP. By the way, I don't suggest you to drink methylene blue. Another cool thing it does is it forms the reactive oxygen